Okay, hi again, everyone. It's Paul from Strongpoint here. Thank you for coming. I will slowly get started, taking my time over the first slide or two just to make sure that everybody has time to get settled. But we appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we hope that this is a useful session for you. So what are we going to cover? First of all, what I'm going to do is talk a bit, or set the stage, so to speak, about what some companies are facing today. It's definitely a period of rapid change in terms of kind of business environment and kind of the operations that people are currently going through. So I want to talk a bit about that, both positives and negatives for different types of companies. What I would then want to talk about is regardless of what side of that equation you're on, whether you're being impacted positively or negatively, what can you and your team be doing inside NetSuite to make sure that you're responding as best as you possibly can. I will then save 5 or 10 minutes or so to give you a very brief overview of kind of where Strongpoint can fit, but at the same time also giving you some tips and tricks of kind of how you in your environment, even without Strongpoint loaded, can help manage the change that's taking place right now a little bit more effectively. And I'll also give you visibility to some of the free tools that we have that you can take advantage of. I know that right now is a difficult time for people to buy things in some cases, and so this isn't just about selling our product today. We are hoping to find ways to help you at no cost. We do have a chat function, a question function inside the webinar, so please feel free to drop anything in there. I can either try to respond during the session or I will save some time at the end to go through it then. So without further ado, again, my name is Paul Stas, so I'm the head of sales here at Strongpoint, and we all appreciate you taking the time to join us today. So what are we up against? Definitely a period of unprecedented change in terms of kind of economic conditions for business, both negative and positive. I like acronyms. I heard one for the beach companies, booking, entertainment and live events, airlines, cruise and casinos, hotels and resorts. They have definitely all been hit, pretty hard. Mostly just due to a dramatic drop in business, in activity, in consumers taking part in whatever it is that they have to offer. And so, what do you do, right? There's really not a lot. People are going to be pinched for budgets. You're seeing turnover and changes and layoffs and things like that. Need to find a way to respond. At the same time, for many organizations that are going through a period like this is also a time where you can respond and you can change and update business operations in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to, because when else do you have a pause that takes place like this? And so there are some companies that are doing their best to take advantage of this time, even if they have experienced layoffs and so on and so forth. On the other side of the coin, I don't have a fancy acronym for these ones, but there's a number of different industries and companies that are benefiting from increased business activity. Insurance, healthcare and related technologies, some software segments are definitely benefiting. Consumer goods, pharmaceuticals, for example, just to name a few, but there's definitely still more. I put those logos down at the bottom thinking that they really did summarize my quarantine or social distancing experience. I know that I read an article the other day that mentioned that sales of peanut butter have gone through the roof. And I know I have a young son, and all he wants to do is eat peanut butter sandwiches at home, so that's definitely the case here. I do join him sometimes in those too. We are also watching more Netflix, and we're using a lot of Clorox products, so I think that those brands are doing just fine. You're currently on a Zoom webinar with me. I think this is the way that I spend most of my day, so no doubt that those kinds of companies have seen increased business, but that also brings change. Increased demand, for example. Zoom has gone through some security concerns, things like that. Not that these are necessarily all NetSuite customers, but there's no doubt that there's a wide variety or wide-ranging impact that we are seeing. So what can you do as a company or as a department or as an individual employee, and how do you want to approach a time of dramatic change? Do you want to look at whether it's responding in difficult situations or stepping up where there's higher demand? What are you going to do? So what we did is we put our heads together and came up with some acronyms that we thought would really kind of describe what you'd want yourself or your department or your system to be in a time like this. And so one of them, obviously, you hear this word being thrown around a lot, is being resilient. So able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. Second here is being nimble, so quick and light in movement or action. The third being flexible, able to be easily modified to respond to altered circumstances or conditions. And then finally, we thought productive, right? Achieving or producing a significant amount or result. And those are all adjectives that we should all kind of be striving to be in a time like this. And so with respect to NetSuite specifically, obviously, they don't necessarily tie directly. But what we've now done is kind of identified a few key areas that we think focusing on for system administrators, developers, consultants, partners, platform leads, so on and so forth. We think that focusing on kind of these three key areas will help you respond a little bit more effectively, both now during kind of a period of crisis, but then also in a couple months or a few weeks or a couple months or however long it takes, to respond quickly and effectively then too. And so the first one that we want to talk about, and this obviously is very much at the core of what we do, it's about system documentation, right? Having complete and full visibility to everything inside your system, all customizations that have been made, and all dependencies that exist. So this is important, I think, at all times, but in a period like this where there could be turnover, for example, or maybe you are needing to bring in some additional help to support with increased demand, having visibility to these kinds of things is really important. And I'll show you some of the key tools in just a second, but this is something that Strongpoint can do for you at no cost. We do have free tools called Flashlight that you can install, and it'll fully document your entire system for you, giving you exactly this kinds of visibility, which leads very well into this second point. So you need to be able to do impact analysis quickly and effectively. You need to understand the risk and complexity of the changes that you're looking at. First of all, there's no time for downtime. You can't make any mistakes in a period like this. But then secondly, you need to be able to effectively prioritize projects, right? Which ones are worth doing or which ones are maybe more complex and aren't justified at a time like this. You won't be able to turn them around in time. It's going to take too long. It's not going to deliver enough value to the business, so on and so forth. But then also resources could be scarce. And so what resources do you want to work on what projects? And you don't want to have your most technical people working on simple things because they could be putting their time in somewhere else. And so how can you do that really effectively? And then finally, one thing that we're seeing is that there's definitely a human element to what's going on right now. Sure, there is turnover, right? People are leaving buildings, unfortunately. And so we are seeing systems with a lot of inactive owners, and that can present issues with respect to administration. We're also seeing a dramatic shift in where people are working, and as a result, people are being given more access, more roles, more permissions, but you can't just give these things out, right? You also need to be able to take them back effectively when things return to a more normal version, so to speak. And in some cases, if you're working for a larger publicly traded organization, you need to be able to block or track this kind of thing as well. And so what I'll do now is I'm going to jump into the system for a quick review of some of these capabilities, or at least how Strongpoint approaches them. As I mentioned, some of it you can do for free with our tools. We're happy to have you sign up for Flashlight. Others are just kind of some general tips and tricks that we may have pre-built, but that you can obviously put together your own version of a saved search that does something very similar. And some of the more advanced capabilities, even if you came to us today and said, hey, I need to be able to do this, it would maybe take you 8 or 12 weeks or something like that until everything was fully up and running. So I don't want to mislead anybody in that respect. But with all of that said, I will jump out here and I'll show you a few things in NetSuite. I'm going to follow kind of that same set of bullets. I'll first show you some of the documentation tools. I'll show you a couple different versions of how you can do impact analysis. And then finally, I'll talk more about kind of managing owners and roles and access and those sorts of things. So the first thing that we always show in any demo is our entity relationship diagram. So you can think of this as like a schema inside NetSuite. What I can do here is scroll through, and I can pull up our customer standard record, and I can visually see anything that Strongpoint has documented on that record. And so here, for example, I've now pulled up my customer record. If I'm looking to make a change to a field, such as this company size field, I can click on it, and what that'll do is kind of branch out and show me anywhere in the system that this particular field is being used. And I can dig into these in more detail. So I can look in and say, okay, well, this field is connected to this search, but how is this search being used? And I can even open that up, and I can look into fields and formulas and the filters. I can also look at information like date last used and even the employees that are using the customization. So you can see here on the customization record, formulas and filters and fields and the date last used, employees that are using it. So a great one-stop shop for information about this particular search, or whether or not I can make a change to this field without impacting something that somebody else is using, or something that the system is using. So I'll give you a different example here. We've got a checkbox that's connected downstream to a workflow, which is connected through to a couple scripts in a search. So this is obviously a much more complex picture here. And if somebody was to go and to make a change to this, there would be downstream impacts on automation, which could obviously cause some headaches. But just quickly identifying this right away allows you to avoid that. Or a different use case would be maybe some of this has stopped working and you don't understand why. Well, again, what you can do is come in and open up these records and have a closer look at kind of the configuration of this particular workflow. But what we are also doing is mapping out those dependencies for you. And so maybe it's not this workflow that broke, but it's something that's connected to the workflow that changed. So you can look at a change log for any change that's been made to this workflow, time-stamped, date-stamped records with diffs, but we can see that this hasn't been changed in a couple of years. But maybe it's one of the related objects that has changed. So we also have related objects that have been populated here. And again, in this case, you can see it hasn't been changed in a couple of years. So in a matter of seconds, we've just said, okay, well, the workflow hasn't changed, anything connected to the workflow hasn't changed, so it must be something like a user role. Narrowed it down, 80, 90% of the way in just a matter of seconds. This is what system documentation does. It indexes everything that's been built in the system and maps out dependencies and tracks usage and gives you all of this kind of visibility. And the majority of what I just showed you, except for change logs, is available in our free Flashlight product. Really, really useful set of tools. If you don't have it already, I would recommend you picking it up. So the next thing that I want to talk a little bit about was impact analysis. And we kind of just did some of it, really, right? We looked at what would be involved with making a change and what would the dependencies look like. But maybe you don't want to do it just from the customer record down. You need to do for a larger group of things all at once. So we also have a way for you to do that. So you can use a impact search form. Say if I wanted to look at every workflow inside my system, I can scroll through the list of types that we've documented and select workflow. And that'll easily pop up here and show me every workflow in my system. And the columns that we have are things like, the parent, the date last used, the script ID, the bundle that it's connected to, and then other dependencies are all documented as well. So sources and forms and lists and scripts and searches and workflows. And a great way for you to see in one big picture, current configuration, dependencies, and we also capture what we call indirect dependencies, which is kind of second and third layer, right? If you've got, like we saw earlier, a checkbox connected to a workflow, and that workflow is connected through to some scripts, and maybe those scripts are also connected to other things, and so on and so forth. So we do capture those for you all in one place. Pretty useful set of tools in that respect, and it just gives you that visibility to see, what would be involved with making a change or a series of changes to one part of your NetSuite system. There are other more automated ways to do this as well in our more advanced packages. So we do have kind of a change request and approval, and you can build in custom policies or controls here. And inside our change request, what you can do is select a group of customizations that are going to be in scope for a particular project or ticket. And then what Strongpoint will automatically do is tell you the level of change control that's required, the approvers that are required, and then we'll break out whether or not those customizations that are in scope can be safely deleted or modified or not. And here you see that 3 of the 4 should not be, according to our recommendations, deleted or modified. And you can see that we give you a breakdown in fairly simple terms. So dependent scripts, not archived, dependent managed bundle, so on and so forth. Okay, so a little bit more formal version of change management if you need that. If you need change requests and approvals and tracking of it all, then this is a great way to do it. It's a more automated version of impact analysis, even if you don't want to get the approvals to do it. It'll still help save you some time and put it in a nice organized fashion, but you can use those first 2 tabs to do things in a little bit more of a manual way. So kind of continue moving on here. So next thing I want to talk a little bit about was more around managing the change that's taking place with respect to people. So we've got a variety of pre-built tools to allow you to do this, but these are some things that you can also do with saved searches, even without Strongpoint. So if I come and hover over the menu here, you can see that our user management tab has a variety of capabilities around just employee permission changes and unused roles and role assignments. We also have cleanup tools that help you track things like unused customizations or customizations that now have inactive owners, right? And maybe we need to understand who has those, whether emails are bouncing or maybe changes need to be made to them, and we just need to understand who we need to go and reassign. And there's no easy way to go off and do that, but at least we can help you identify them. I think that's a really important first step, obviously. And so we've got a few different reports that would allow you to do that. So just a quick view of one, customizations with an inactive owner. So being able to track all of that. And again, you can edit these because they're all native to NetSuite if you needed to pull in more information. So maybe you don't want to just go and reassign things if they're not being used. So pull in the date last used. And then compare that against some of the other cleanup reports that we have to understand if things actually can be cleaned up or not. Another really common thing that we're seeing, especially with people working from home, is that some employees are going to need or have needed increased levels of access in the system. And that could be due to the fact that they can't meet in person, or they don't have access to all of their tools and systems, or it could be, again, because maybe you're trying to do the same job with a limited number of people. And so there are a variety of ways for you to track permission changes or role changes or role assignments, and that's one of the things that you can do with our What Change report, for example. So this is a pre-built way for you to look at all of our individual change logs that we've created. I've filtered here just to show user role changes, and you could be able to filter that by date. And I think the big thing here is that if you are going through a period where you're making a lot of changes to your system, specifically with respect to access, it's probably a good idea for you to keep track of them in an effective way, because you'll want to bring these back afterwards. We do work on a lot of SOD projects, segregation of duties projects, and one of the most difficult things for older legacy accounts is that the roles and permissions are a mess, and you've got all of these, ghost roles and permissions out there where people have multiple assignments, but they're not actually being used. I think that this will be a trigger for that, right? People are going to be doing SOD projects in 2 years, and everything's going to be a mess, and they're going to be like, oh, well, this is because of COVID. So tracking it all effectively would allow you to go back and make those changes in the future. Now, if you're already public, that presents new challenges, because any new assignments should be made in a compliant way, right? How can you be sure that that new role that you added doesn't conflict with one of the old roles that they already had and gives them an unacceptable level of permission? That can be a lot to track. So for those that are already installed, we do have a way to help with that as well. I'll walk you through a couple slides on that, or a couple tabs on that. So the way that we approach that challenge, just around ensuring that people have an appropriate level of access and the roles and permissions that they have are sufficient for their job and no more. So we have a pre-built library of rules, a couple different ways to look at this, but generally speaking, we can look at just putting some control around your most critical roles. A one-sided rule is what we call it, where you can't have admin access unless there's an approval in place, for example. A second rule type that we have is a two-sided rule, which says something like, well, if you have permission A, you can't have permission B. Even if they appear in different roles, you can't have both of them assigned, and that's something that's very difficult to track manually. And so what we do is we'll automatically do that analysis as soon as a role is assigned and alert you if there's risk. I'll show you quickly what that looks like. So I just came to John Smith's employee record, and you can see here that John's SOD status is currently clear. However, if I go in to edit it, and I'll show you a couple different examples. So the first one, let's say I go to give John a new controller role. So he's now got 2 higher level financial roles, and I hit save. So Strongpoint's going to run a quick check in the background. It's going to see that we aren't putting any blocking controls in place for this. So it's going to allow it to continue, which it did. And you can see now that his SOD status has been shifted to in queue. If I hit refresh here quickly, it'll say processing. I was hoping it was already going to be done, but I was too quick. And now we're seeing that there's a violation here. And so it's saying that users who make journal entries should not have the permission to approve journal entries. And so what we're seeing is that there's one permission in the first row and a second permission in the second that conflict. And we've identified that as being a potential issue, and we've now alerted somebody appropriate for it. And we haven't prevented it from happening, but we've at least alerted you to that risk, which is important. Maybe just alerting to the risk isn't enough. You need to actually have things blocked, especially for the most critical access in your system. So if I come in to give the administrator role as an example, I hit add and save. What we're going to see is that instead of allowing this to go through and then processing and alerting you of a violation, this is actually going to prevent it from happening. So we've got a blocking control in place for the assignment of the administrator role. And so what this is doing is saying that you can't do this. You can't give this role to this person, because there's this rule that's in place, and it's giving the option to actually, request approval. And this would kick off a change management process through Strongpoint within NetSuite to go off and issue a change request. But what we're seeing is that as this refreshes, that administrator role wasn't actually assigned. All right, so it's a great way for you to just all out prevent access, which is becoming increasingly important for compliance purposes, especially in regulated industries or for larger publicly traded companies. So the other issue that we see a lot of right now is that people have SOD violations. They've had to quickly give people more access than they were expecting to. And as a result, there's risk. Right? People have too many permissions. They can create vendors and issue POs to those vendors and approve them, or they can make modifications or deletions or whatever the case may be. So how do you track all of that? Well, you can build saved searches to do it, which can be time consuming and manual. Strongpoint also has a library of those as well. So these are saved searches, but in a bit more of an auditable format because they're closed loop. I'll give you an example here. So we've got a pre-built saved search that monitors for journal entries that have been created and approved by the same user. You can determine how frequently you want those to run and who you want to be alerted if that actually happens. But then what we're also going to see is that there's a way for you to review all of the results all in one place and show, yes, I have looked at these and they're okay. So it's a good way for you to get around that. Again, this takes a little bit of time to install, but for those that have it, it's a good way for them to be, nimble and flexible with respect to adding and managing these roles and the conflicts that this is all presenting. So that's about it for today. Wanted to keep this one kind of short and sweet. I'm quickly going to pull up the presentation again for one last second. And again, I think that if you're going to take anything away from this webinar, if it was up to us, we would say take these things away. In a time like this, whether your business is challenged by a slowdown or challenged by unanticipated growth, you need to find ways to be resilient, nimble, flexible, and productive. And we think that we've got tools that allow you to do that. Right? We'll help you document your system automatically, map out all of those dependencies so that you can start doing impact analysis more quickly, even if you've got people in the system that are brand new to it. Right? Giving somebody that kind of a visibility and understanding is really critical. And so we can do that quickly, automatically, and for the most part at no cost. So please feel free to reach out for that. And then also you do want to make sure that you're flexible and productive, which obviously ties in with those first two things. And so if you can find some extra ways to do this, then I think that we'll all be better off because of it. So I haven't seen any questions come through yet. I know I ripped through that pretty quickly. So I'll pause for a second to see if there's any questions. And if there is not, then I will just thank you for your time. Yeah, okay, so there is one question. So question is about our kind of product tiers. So so to answer the question, Strongpoint does come in different products, in different product tiers. So we have 4 of them. There's Flashlight, which is our kind of entry level, I don't want to call it entry level, but our first product tier, really robust set of tools, but for basic documentation only. Takes a snapshot of your environment, done automatically in a day or two at the most. Gives you great visibility to everything that you've got. The second tier we call documentation and optimization. And what that adds is some of those cleanup tools that you saw. So getting visibility to unused customizations or inactive owners or script management capabilities or user management capabilities. So that's in our second tier. Our third tier is change management. And what that gives you is change controls or policies, change requests and approvals, impact analysis, as well as some deployment capabilities. So we do have a deployment tool through Eclipse. So you can push things from one environment to the next, depending on the SDF for that. We also have environment comparison tools, allowing you to kind of compare sandbox to production after doing a deployment, for example. And then the final tier that we have is enterprise compliance, and that's where you see integration with ticketing systems like ServiceNow and Jira, as well as some of the segregation of duties and financial controls that I walked you through at the end there. So 4 product tiers. You don't need to buy, everything. If you don't need it all, you can just buy kind of the initial bits and pieces. But if you need the advanced tools, then you pretty much need to buy everything. And then the flashlight tool is for free for 6 months. And that's the only question. So I hope that means that I did an excellent job and everybody understood exactly what I said. So I will close it out. Again, I appreciate your time. I know it's a crazy time for everybody, whether you're on one side of the equation or the other. And wishing you guys all the best. Hope to be back in touch with you soon.